What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and welcome to episode 4 of my Quest for the Perfect Folding Knife mini-series. If you have not watched episodes 1 through 3, I do have a playlist on my channel. You can go back and watch these in order, or you can watch them out of order, whatever you want. This is the episode list. We are currently on deployment and manipulation. I want to go over this again just so people understand. This is not me telling you what is absolutely ideal. It is essentially, this whole mini-series is about me picking and choosing, certain aspects of a folding knife that are ideal for me. And this is based on all of my experience, all of my accumulated experience with folding knives, using and collecting and, just finding out what works for me. Now, I don't believe that the perfect folding knife exists yet, but this is sort of me sort of climbing that mountain and going over everything that I do or don't like about, certain ergonomics, materials, blade shape, stuff like that. So if I'm not describing your ideal, in this case, deployment and manipulation methods on a folding knife, don't be offended. Really, what the point of this is to show you my ritual, or to show you, the process that I go through when I select a pocket knife and what I would ideally choose if I could have exactly what I wanted. And then you can use that and apply it to yourself, and hopefully, maybe ultimately discover your own perfect folding knife. Anyways, let's go ahead and place a bunch of different types of knives out on the table that have a bunch of different deployment methods. And let's talk about them all real quick. Whole bunch of stuff here. Most of this stuff, in fact, all of this stuff, you guys will have seen on the channel already. What do we have that's slightly different? Let's give some bad examples with some good ones. What else? How about one of these? There we go. Okay, so you guys have seen all of these pocket knives on the table before on the channel. Some of them I've said good things about, some of them I've said bad things about. These all, for the most part, have relatively different means of deployment. The crown lifter here, this is a slip joint style folding knife, and it requires 2 hands. Now, that's great, and these knives come in handy in certain situations. Some people prefer them. But for me, this is not going to be for me in terms of my ideal folding knife. I love the crown lifter. I love Great Eastern Cutlery knives, and I love slip joint style knives. But if I'm being honest with myself, I don't consider it an ideal form of manipulation because I have to use 2 hands. I like to use 1 hand. Some of you guys don't, but I do. The rainbow, the mermaid knife, the Tac Force mermaid knife, it has a literal flipper tab, but it's assisted. On a flipper knife, I am not a fan of an assisted spring. I want to be the person. I want to be the force. I want to be the energy behind the flip. I don't want a spring to do the job for me because it's an extra part that can wear out. And over time, for the most part, a manual flipper is just going to outlast one with a spring in it. That's just going to be the case. I mean, if you took 1,000 spring-assisted knives and then you took 1,000 of the same knife and de-assisted them, just took the spring out and you just kept flipping them over and over and over and over again, eventually the ones that or de-assisted them is the wrong way to say that, but the springs would wear out, on the ones that were assisted before, just the general knife would wear out altogether, or whatever was responsible for keeping the structural integrity intact on the manual flipping knife. The manual ones would last longer, I guess is what I'm saying. Next up, we have the Spidey hole. This is one of my favorite means of deployment. I love how I can, the access to that thumb hole makes it easy to open it slowly. It also makes it easy on the thumb flick, makes it easy on the reverse flick, and it makes it easy to do novelty stuff like that, which is unnecessary. But, I mean, if I'm being honest with myself, it is fun to do. That's great. It is it's lacking my desire for the flipper. I mean, it's darn near perfect, but I just, I'm fidgety. And some of you are not going to consider fidget factor an important aspect of all this, but I absolutely do. That one's going to stay on the table here. Next up, we have the sort of thumb disc, thumb notch thing. Now, on this knife, it does work, despite me failing twice in a row. It does actually work perfectly well in the forward flick position, and it also works in the rear flick position. Now I have the flipper tab. This is the Line Steel TRE, or 3 rapid exchange, meaning it has this detachable thumb stud or thumb disc thing, and then it's also got a detachable flipper tab, which I don't have on there because the detent is too weak to make that flipper work properly, but man does it work well like this. Now again, it's also close, but it bothers me a little bit in this position, and so do thumb discs. You kind of have to get more underneath the lip of them this way. I think they're better for reverse flicking, but I don't want to fully depend on a reverse flick to deploy a knife because it's not 100% reliable. What we've got here is a terrible knife, an absolutely terrible knife. This is the Gerber flat iron, and it's got one of these flat notch things, I guess. I mean, I figured out how to flip this way, and it works. I figured out how to flip it this way, but it's uncomfortable. I mean, to get my finger in there, what's happening to my finger like that, it's just not it's not a comfortable thing for my hands at all. And I just don't like it. You know, I don't like putting my fingernail back there and feeling the flakes of my fingernail coming off as I deploy it. It's not comfortable. It is easy to open this way if you're going to open it with 2 hands, but I don't think that that's an ideal system for opening a folding knife. Moving on to the next means of deployment here, we have thumb studs. Now, here's an example of a bad thumb stud. This isn't necessarily the placement of the thumb stud. It's simply the fact that this is not a well-made knife. You know, so that, I don't know, that's kind of unfair. I mean, obviously I want a deployment method that works, but all things have to be taken into consideration here. You know, I mean, the washers have to be smooth if they are washers. In this case, they're the Teflon. Bearings have to be smooth. You know, the detent has to be heavy enough to where I can build up some force, but light enough that it actually allows me to release the knife. Here's an example of a good thumb stud opener. Actually, I've got 2 good thumb stud openers I want to use as an example. The Ritter Hogue, perfect. Just enough. You know, it's not necessarily a detent on this one. It's the axis lock riding across or creating friction on the back of the tang of the blade that allows me to fire it. Here's a traditional thumb stud deployment. Whoops, I hit my my camera base there. But this is set up with a detent. So this is going to fire like this. That is awesome. That's what I'm looking for, truthfully, in a in like the perfect thumb stud deploying folding knife. And I love thumb stud deployers, absolutely. But again, I'm still lacking that want for a flipper. Here's an example of a good flipper. This is manual, running on bearings. Has a flipper tab. We'll put the XM18 out here because we're going to talk about that one. Has the flipper tab that's not sticking up like this one, not digging into my finger when I flip it. It also has a nice smooth landing zone that's different than the XM18. It's got the detent that allows it to rock it out into position, and it falls smoothly back into place. This is an example of a fantastic deployment mechanism in terms of a flipper tab. But it's lacking what I want with the thumb studs and the spider hole, you know? So let me get out here some of my favorite knives in terms of, you know, deployment. All of these, man, these things are like the kings of deployment in my book. I mean, these are my favorite fidget knives because they're so reliable. They fire out hard. I know exactly. I mean, my hands are used to them, but I think all of these are knives that people can, you know, get used to pretty easily. Microtech SOCOM Elite, Manix 2, Paramilitary 2, Shaman, XM18, Bestech Lion, and the Hogue Ritter RSK MK1 G2. Now, unfortunately, I like the deployment mechanisms between all these, but they're all missing some. You know, the XM18 has the thumb stud and the flipper. And while I can use the thumb stud on an XM18, any of you who have ever tried to deal with that thumb stud, especially on these newer Gen 6s that have the really heavy detents, you have to, number one, you have to go here, and you have to fire this way to get it to deploy. And that, it's not, I don't really like that as much. I want to fire this way. I want to fire up, you know? But that's a problem with a flipper. is you need a heavy enough detent to get the flipper to work, but you also need a light enough detent to get the thumb stud to work. Now, the Microtech SOCOM Elite is an example of a knife that has an excellent detent, and the position of the thumb stud allows you to break that heavy detent and deploy the knife readily. I think you could actually add a flipper tab. I don't know how you do it, but you could actually add a functional flipper tab to the back of that SOCOM Elite and make that work. I think there is a sweet spot for the detent in terms of a flipper and a thumb stud. Now I'm going to remove some of these from the table here real quick. I love the Paramilitary 2. It's no different than the Mannix 2. Now I know you guys are wondering, like if you're going to talk about manipulation, shouldn't you talk about Loctite? That's actually going to be one of the episodes we're going to talk about next. I'm going to remove the Paramilitary 2. I'm going to remove the Mannix 2. I'm going to remove this guy. So these are probably my favorite fidgety knives, and they're also my favorite. It gives me the best feeling of satisfaction in terms of deployment. We've got a thumb stud opener. We've got a thumb hole opener. We've got a flipper with thumb studs. And we've got one that's just a flipper. Now, ideally, I would have all of these things together. Now, I know you're like, why? You've already got a flipper. Why do you have the best again? Because the Bestex flipper tab is an example of a flipper tab that just makes more sense to me. Ideally, I would have something where you had the thumb studs that were out of the cutting path, that were also bracing on the frame, but were also functional. ZT0562, I'm looking at you. I want those functional thumb studs, but I like how they brace there. I want the flipper tab, but I don't want one like this. I want one that looks like this. I understand the point, the curvature of the XM18 being designed initially as a finger guard, but this one kind of does the same thing, except back here it's not so hooky and pointy, and it's just more comfortable. That's what I want. I also want the thumb hole. My thoughts are the reason that you could make the thumb hole work with a thumb stud / bracing lug is because it's right in the cutting path, but it's a hole, so the material's just going to pass over it. Now you're thinking, why this is overkill? Why do you need so many deployment mechanisms? Truthfully, it's just to have choice. I like the idea of knowing that in whatever circumstance that I'm in, when I pull it out of my pocket, whatever natural urge I have, whatever signal my brain is sending to my hands or my fingers at that time, I don't know that I'll be able to control it, but it just has everything. So whether my subconscious is thinking I'm going to deploy it with my thumb like this in the thumb hole position, or if I'm going to latch onto that thumb stud, oh, that is tough. Let's use this one. If I'm going to latch onto that thumb stud, or if I'm going to do, a reverse flick with a thumb stud, or if I'm just going to flip it. As long as it's all outside of the cutting path and everything's got a function, the flipper's flipping the knife if you want to flip it that way. The thumb studs, you can use them, or they brace and add for stability, rigidity, whatever, stability of the blade. Or you have the convenience of the thumb hole, I want all of those things together. And that sounds crazy, but I can't deny that that's what I want. If something like that existed, I would really, really want to go for that. Now, I wouldn't just buy the knife just for that. It would have to be a combination of all these things. Remember, this is like my ideal fantasy folding knife. But as long as it was out of the way of the cutting path and everything was functional and, worked correctly without creating an unnecessary hindrance, which I think is actually possible, to get all of those things to work in unison. That would be ideal for me. Now, I may have lost some of you guys on this. A lot of you guys may have kind of fizzled out and been like, hey, he's kind of getting like weird and crazy in particular, and we're drifting away from utility, and we're drifting into like oddball preferences. Kind of not. I probably could justify. Truthfully, that's what I was kind of getting into, is the justification for all these different deployment mechanisms is knowing or having the feeling of the confidence carrying something like this in your pocket, that knowing as soon as I pull it out, it's going to deploy one way or another, and I don't have to rely on just one means of deployment. Now, the counter argument for that is why do you feel like you would need to depend on more than one means of deployment? You know, a lot of you fans of the ProTech button automatic or side opening automatic knives, just that's simple and easy. You just push a button and it goes. Taking into consideration fidget factor, you know, my love of just like playing with knives and doing different things. I don't know, you know, I like to sit around on my couch and flip knives and do the reverse the reverse flick or the reverse kick out. You know, I like to do stuff like that. So being able to enjoy my knives that way and also have the confidence, you know, in my pocket that when I pull it out, whatever odd angle it happens to be in, depending on what I'm doing. If I'm up on a ladder holding something up, I always use that example. You know, I never know exactly how much brain capacity I'm going to be able to dedicate to that right hand that's reaching into the pocket for the folding knife. Wherever it lands, you know, I want to make sure that it's gonna automatically gravitate towards the most reasonable means of deployment in that specific scenario. I'm really reaching there for justification, guys. I completely understand. You know, I can almost feel your eye rolls, but I'm being honest. That's what I want. I want to see all of this together in one knife. I think that would be super cool. That's pretty much going to be it for today, guys. You know, I hope you guys are enjoying this series. I'm really having fun doing it. It's fun. It's fun to explore this kind of stuff. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, then please subscribe to my channel because there's definitely more coming. Thanks for watching and have a great day.